They say the wind in Blackthorn Valley carries secrets if you listen close enough. Whispers of deals struck in the dark, of debts settled in blood, and of people who vanish without a trace, only to reappear under someone else's name. I never believed it. Not until the night I saw her, thin from hunger but holding her head high, standing in a corner of Silas Crowe's saloon as if the very floorboards were trying to swallow her whole. If you believe no one should ever be owned, that a person's worth can't be measured in debts or contracts, then make sure you're subscribed, because this story is one you'll carry with you long after it's told. I remember it all because it was the night I was sent to collect her. My orders were simple. Bring Clara Jennings to Crowe's ranch, where she'd serve until an inflated, fabricated debt was worked off, a sentence that could stretch into years. I was the muscle Crowe trusted for dirty jobs like this, but when I looked at her, I knew I wasn't going to follow through, and that decision would turn my quiet, hard-earned life into a firestorm. The air in the saloon was thick with smoke and the sour stink of spilled whiskey, the piano in the corner playing out of tune, while Crowe's men lounged in their chairs, boots up, grinning like wolves who'd just cornered a rabbit. Clara didn't flinch when I stepped toward her, though her hands clenched at her skirts like she was holding the last threads of herself together. "You Elias Brand?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I gave a single nod, expecting her to plead or bargain, but instead she just said, "Let's get this over with." That hit me harder than a punch to the jaw. No fear, just resignation, the kind of defeat you only see in someone who's been worn down, piece by piece. We walked out together under the cold light of the moon, the snow crunching under our boots. Crowe's man at the door muttered something about Crowe bait, and Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to it. I had my horse tied out front, and when I helped her into the saddle, I could feel how light she was, like lifting a bundle of twigs. I'd intended to head west toward Crowe's spread, but when we reached the fork in the road, I pulled the reins and turned east instead, toward my ranch in the Ironclad Hills. She didn't say a word for the first 2 miles, probably because she hadn't figured out yet that I wasn't taking her where Crowe wanted her. Finally, she asked, "Why aren't we heading north?" And I told her the truth. I didn't believe in men owning people, and I wasn't about to hand her over to someone like Silas Crowe. I could feel her staring at me in the dark, but she didn't thank me, didn't even sigh in relief. All she said was, "You just made yourself a powerful enemy," and she was right. By the time we reached my ranch, dawn was bleeding pale gold over the hills. I led her inside, lit the fire, and gave her the leftover stew from the night before. She ate slow, like someone who didn't want to show how hungry she really was, and I couldn't stop noticing the small details. The way her eyes tracked every sound outside, the way her shoulders stayed stiff even in the warmth. Over the next few days, she kept her distance, helping with small chores without being asked, never asking questions about why I'd taken the risk for her. I didn't press her, figuring she'd tell me in her own time. But trouble doesn't wait for explanations. On the third morning, I spotted riders on the ridge, Crowe's men, 3 of them, just sitting their horses and watching the ranch. I kept my rifle in sight after that, and Clara noticed. That night, as we sat by the fire, she told me the whole truth. She'd been teaching in town when Crowe bought up the school's debts, then found an old note with her father's signature, claiming her family owed him money. Her father had been dead 3 years, but in Blackthorn Valley, dead men's debts still get collected, sometimes in land, sometimes in flesh. When she refused to settle the debt by marrying Crowe, he had the sheriff, who's in his pocket, sign papers making her an indentured servant. I could feel my blood run hot at the thought of it, a man using the law as his leash. I told her she was safe here, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The next day, one of Crowe's men came riding up bold as brass, a message in his hand. Crowe was giving me one chance to hand her over before he came to collect. I sent the man back with a different message, that if Crowe set foot on my land, he'd ride back out with fewer parts than he came in with. That evening, Clara stood at my door while I fed the horses, her hair loose in the wind. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice quieter than before. I told her maybe I didn't, but I wanted to. That was the first time I saw her smile. Not much, just the smallest lift at the corner of her mouth, but enough to tell me the ice between us had started to crack. Still, the tension around the ranch grew thicker with each day Crowe didn't make his move. We both knew he was waiting for the right moment, and in Blackthorn Valley, Waiting usually meant plotting. At night, I'd hear her pacing in the loft room I'd given her, and sometimes, long after the fire had burned low, I'd catch her standing at the window, staring out into the dark like she expected something, or someone, to be there. I didn't tell her that sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, I thought I heard horses moving in the distance, slow and careful, like they didn't want to be found. Whatever was coming, I knew we'd face it together, though I couldn't yet admit, even to myself, just how much that mattered to me. The first sign that Crowe had made his move came in the form of silence. Too much of it. The kind that wraps around you and makes every sound you do hear feel like it's been sharpened. It was the fourth morning since his rider had delivered that threat, and the air outside was so still it set the hairs on my arms on edge. Clara was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back in a loose knot, kneading bread like it was the only thing holding her together. She didn't look at me when she said, "They'll come soon. You can feel it too." I didn't bother denying it. Instead, I told her we were going into town, not to hide, but to make a show of things. If Crowe thought we were hunkered down, he'd come for us at night. If he saw we weren't afraid to walk right into the heart of Blackthorn Valley together, it might buy us time. She didn't argue, just grabbed her shawl and followed me out. The ride-in was quiet, the Ironclad Hills watching us with those long shadows they throw in winter, and I kept one hand near the rifle slung across my saddle. The moment we crossed into town, conversation stopped. People stared, some nodding in what might have been respect, others looking away fast like they didn't want Crowe to see them watching. We went to the general store first for supplies, and I noticed Clara catching the eye of Mrs. Adler, the postmaster's wife, who gave her the smallest nod, a silent signal that word about her situation had spread, and not everyone was on Crowe's side. But it was at the smithy that things shifted. Ben Carter, who's worked iron here longer than I've been alive, stepped out with a wrapped parcel and handed it to me without a word. Inside was a length of chain, heavy and cold, with a lock. "Gate latch," he muttered, then walked back into his shop. He didn't have to say the rest. It was a quiet warning: lock things down. By the time we rode back toward the ranch, the sky was low and gray, and I could see movement in the distance along the ridge. 3 riders again, but not just watching this time. They were testing the land, circling closer, peeling off when they thought we were looking. That night, Clara sat across from me at the table, her face lit by the fire's glow, and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What will you do when he comes?" I told her the truth, stand my ground, and, if need be, make sure Crowe doesn't walk away from my land. She didn't flinch, didn't try to soften it with talk of the law or negotiation. Instead, she said, "Then teach me." At first, I thought I'd misheard her, but the look in her eyes was steady. I took her outside, my breath clouding in the cold air, and showed her how to hold the rifle, how to brace her stance, how to breathe out before squeezing the trigger. She wasn't perfect, but she was quick, faster than I expected, and she didn't shy away from the recoil. "I'm not afraid of him," she said between shots. "I'm afraid of losing what little choice I have left." I didn't tell her that was the same thing driving me. 2 days later, the choice was almost taken from us. I was mending fence on the north line when I heard the rapid beat of hooves and saw dust rising. Crowe's men, this time without the pretense of distance. Clara was in the yard, hanging laundry, but the moment she spotted them, she dropped the sheet in her hands and ran for the porch. They reined up just beyond the gate. The leader, Tommy Riggs, one of Crowe's meanest, leaning forward in his saddle with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Crowe says last chance," he called. "Hand her over, or we come back tonight and take her. Won't be as polite about it." I stood between them and Clara, feeling the old weight of my rifle against my palm, and told him I'd put the first bullet through his chest if he set foot past the gate. For a moment, it looked like he might test me, but then he spat in the dirt, turned his horse, and rode off with the others. I knew then it wouldn't be long. That evening, while I checked the outbuildings, Clara came to me with something wrapped in cloth. It was her father's pocket knife, worn smooth from years of use. He used to say you can't always choose the fight, but you can choose how you face it, she told me, pressing it into my hand. I closed my fingers over it, feeling the ghost of another man's grip there, and promised her I'd face whatever came our way with her beside me. As night fell, we lit only one lamp inside, keeping the rest of the house in shadow, so anyone watching wouldn't know where we were. I sat by the window, listening to the wind push against the eaves, thinking of how quickly the world can shift from a simple job to a war worth dying for. In the loft above, I could hear Clara moving, not restless like before but deliberate, preparing. I realized then that I no longer thought of her as the woman I'd rescued from Crowe. She was my partner in this fight, and whether or not we survived it, Crowe was going to learn that there are some debts you can't collect, not with threats, not with the law in your pocket, and not with fear. They came at dawn, the sky still streaked with the pale silver of morning frost, hooves thundering over frozen ground like a drumbeat promising blood. I was already in the yard, rifle in hand, when I saw Crowe at the head of 6 riders, his black coat flaring behind him like the shadow he'd cast over this valley for years. Clara was in the loft window with the pistol, steady as stone, her braid hanging over one shoulder. Crowe reined up just beyond the gate, his smile thin and poisonous. "Last chance, Brand. Give me what's mine, and maybe you keep the land." I told him she was never his, and if he stepped 1 inch closer, he'd never leave here breathing. He laughed, sharp and hollow, and flicked his hand. 2 of his men charged, but Clara's first shot cracked through the air, splintering the post beside them, and they pulled back fast. That gave me my opening. I fired once, twice, dropping one man's horse and sending the rest scattering for cover. Crowe's voice cut through the chaos, cursing, ordering, but I could hear something else underneath, fear. He'd come expecting to intimidate, not to meet a wall that pushed back. The fight didn't last long. When a bullet from Clara's pistol tore the brim from his hat, Crowe's nerve broke. He turned his horse, shouting for his men to follow, and in moments they were only dark shapes retreating into the hills. I kept the rifle up until they were gone. The only sound my breath and the faint click as Clara eased her pistol's hammer down. When she came down from the loft, her cheeks were flushed, her hands still steady. "We did it," she said, but her voice carried more relief than triumph. I told her it wasn't over, not until we made sure Crowe never tried this again. But for now, the ranch was ours. That night, with the wind low and the fire warm, she sat beside me instead of across the table. For a long time we didn't speak, just listened to the quiet that had felt impossible days before. When I finally said she was safe here, she looked at me with something softer than gratitude, something that felt like trust. And for the first time, she didn't go upstairs when the night grew late. She stayed, curling against me on the couch, her breath evening out as she fell asleep in my arms. She wasn't my debt to collect, my burden to guard, or my fight to win. She was my choice, and I was hers. Outside, the valley lay silent, but I knew the wind was still carrying whispers. Only now, they'd be telling a different story.